bring you all a welcome from Jack's family. And then it occurred to me that I wasn't sure which family would be welcoming you, whether it would be the biological and bound by marriage family, or if it would be his brothers and sisters in fellowship, that I would welcome you on behalf, or his brothers and sisters in poetry, that I would welcome you on their behalf as well. So I simply say to you, welcome to this celebration of a man who had a rich community of many people, many beloveds, and we are here today to celebrate his life, the life of Jack McCarthy. We gather here to speak his name again, to recall his face, the sound of his voice, and the spirit of life that filled him through all his days. We come here today aware that the world has lost, we have lost, a beloved husband, a father and grandfather, a mentor, a friend, a loving soul and truth-teller with the gift of words. We are aware that someone precious and wonderful will no longer bless our presence. And still we come together to celebrate the time that was ours to share with Jack, to speak our gratitude for his life that has touched us and enriched our days. We gather here indeed in the presence of loss and of grief, but also, and most importantly, to be mindful of this gift of life that is ours, the gift of life that was Jack's, and to pause together in gratitude and love. So welcome to you all. It is good to be together this day. I'd like to invite Ty to come forward to light our chalice. Our chalice is the symbol of Unitarianism worldwide. Ty was a special friend to Jack, and he to Ty. And he lights our chalice with these words: birth is a miracle of love and courage, bringing light into the world. Death is a loss of light, but no less an act of courage, for we are born from and return to mystery. I'd like to invite Neil forward to introduce the video tribute for Jack.
In the words of Jack McCarthy, I don't much care what happens in the immediate aftermath of my death. Just please, don't do anything sad. Let there be parties. And so it is, welcome to Jack's party. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Scott, and I am probably the one here today who knew Jack the least amount of time. Yet the depth of friendship has little to do with time and so much to do with love. I was privileged to be at Jack's memorial last week in Lexington, Massachusetts, where Jack was actually present in a New Balance shoebox. I figured you'd get that. For those who don't know, in one of his poems, Jack said, "When I die, don't bury my body, put it in an old shoebox." And that shoebox was front and center, though I'm not sure how many people realize the significance of the shoebox. Now, those of you who knew Jack well know what a wonderful and unique sense of humor he had. And I swear that during the service, I could hear Jack whisper in my ear, "How ironic. I'm now Jack in the Box." I'm the producer and host of a national radio show called Recovery Coast to Coast. That deals exclusively with addiction and recovery. It originates from Clear Channel Studios in Seattle at 8:50 a.m. This past August, my friend Mike Hickey, who frequently co-hosts with me on Recovery Coast to Coast, first told me about Jack. He called me up to tell me about this amazing man who had been continuously sober for 40 years. He said, "We have got to get him on the radio show." I told him to set it up, and soon learned that because of Jack's health issues, it would be too much for him to go to our studios in Seattle, so I suggested that we take the remote equipment that I use when doing the show in other parts of the country over to Jack's home to do the interview. In honor of Jack, I will replay that program Monday evening at 10 p.m. on 8:50 a.m. Now, you may not get it this far north, the signal's a little bit choppy. However, if you see me at the reception following the service and give me your email address, I would be more than happy to send you a link to the show. And in honoring and abiding by the traditions of AA, on that show, Jack used the name John X. Now, a week later, I was at a house concert called Words and Music over in Vaughan, Washington, hosted by Jack's friend Jerry Libstaff. Jack was the opening act. He provided the words. And it was there that I met Carol, who told me that Jack had some serious health issues that were getting worse, and she regretted that he would not be able to record his poetry. I told her that I would be willing to block out Monday mornings and would take the recording equipment to their home and record as many poems as we could, as long as Jack's energy held up. We recorded close to 100 pieces of poetry that will be released in the coming months and the coming years. That began a 6-month friendship with the remarkable Jack McCarthy. These last 6 months have been a lifetime and a love time for me. He became the brother that I never had, and he brought so much into my life in such a short period of time. I was reminded of the words of a wonderful song by a friend of mine, Chuck Brodsky, from Asheville, North Carolina. The lines of the chorus have been a constant beacon in my life. They are, "We are each other's angels, we meet when it is time. We keep each other going, and we show each other signs." Jack was an angel to me. Most of you are familiar with the book Tuesdays with Maury. Well, for me, for the last 6 months, it was Mondays with Jack. We shared so much in common. He was from South Boston rather. I was from Providence, a few miles away. We shared the same love of music, of sports. Now, he was a huge Red Sox fan, which I forgave him for. We were both avid runners, and of course, our love of poetry. We also shared a similar kind of Irish humor. Did you hear the one about the Irishman who walked out of a bar? Hey, it could happen. And it actually did happen to Jack 50 years ago. He walked out of a bar and into the loving fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. 10 years later, he stepped out for a weekend to do some additional research. But they told him to keep coming back, and he did, remaining in continuous recovery for the past 40 years, one day at a time. His home group, which was so very important to him, right here in this church. And by the way, Jack has a new book coming out in the next couple of months about recovery. It's called Drunks and Other Poems of Recovery. And I'm pleased to tell you that the publisher is here today and has brought a limited number of advanced copies. They'll be available today at the reception. And Carol might even be willing to write a personal inscription. The new recovery book will be officially published sometime next month. Just a few hours before Jack ran out of breath, I was with Jack and I asked him about his date with death. He said, as he told me before, he was excited about going on to the next great adventure. On that Monday morning, I told Jack and Carol that I wanted to put together a video tribute using Jack's voice with some excerpts from the poetry that we'd recorded, along with a collection of photographs, all synchronized to a marvelous song by Carla Bonoff called Goodbye, My Friend. I played that song for Jack and Carol on that Monday morning. And my last words to Jack as I gently held his hand, "Goodbye, my friend."
I'd like to invite Mike McGee to come forward to read one of Jack's, The Spaces Between.
Thanks. On the way down here, I wanted to point out, because it was just too awesome, the car I was riding in, Amanda Bettis' car, full of Bellingham folk, the car stalled on the exit coming out here in Marysville, and immediately a tow truck pulled up and said, "Do you need a ride?" And Robert Houston goes, "That's Jack. Thank you, Jack." Then the Vancouver carload of poets pulls up in front of the tow truck and asks us if we need a ride. So, thanks, Jack. And then Sarah and Marcus just told me a story about how on the way here, it was storming like crazy, and all of a sudden it cleared, and they could see a full rainbow. They like drove through a full rainbow, and they're like, "Thanks, Jack." So, doing more now than he ever did. Anyway, thanks for having me up here. The spaces between. It hurts when love dies. When love is deep, it hurts deeply. More deeply, maybe, than you thought anything would ever hurt again. But with time, the spaces between the moments when it hurts get longer. The moments themselves become less devastating, till eventually you come to associate them with a sad sweetness that has as much in common with love as it does with grief. I will not say, "Don't grieve for me." Do I look like St. Francis? But I wish you long spaces between, and may you carry into them all of that sweetness, and only enough sadness to attest the risk that's being taken by everyone who loves you. Every time we love, we're saying, "Let it ride." And what's on the table is the rent money. And every time we stride again out into that crisp desert night, our fists shoved deep into empty pockets, we know ourselves for losers. But Jesus, what brave losers we are. I wish you this too, for the spaces in between, this bravery.
And the Red Sox were doing very well at that point. Jack wore his Red Sox cap into Dr. Kaplan's office. Dr. Kaplan refused to talk with him until I turned it around. And then he still refused to talk because he could read Red Sox. So he had to move it so he couldn't read Red Sox. Anyway, what are my final words about Jack? When Jack woke up each morning, he truly had a smile on his face. He told me that if he believed in reincarnation, that he would never want to be reincarnated because no life could be as good as this one. He was able to retire from his computer job when he turned 62 and do his poetry full-time. He did poetry tours all over the country, went to Spain to perform his poem Drunks, and got to go to Ireland by being a poet on 2 tour buses. What a life, and I got to share that life with him. Thank you.
Hello. We will now look at this poem. It's called Desiderata. It was one of Grandpa Jack's favorites, and I will read it for you. Go placidly amidst the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexatious to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career. However humble, it is a real possession in changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of years, gracefully surrendering the themes of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune. But do not distress yourself with dark imagings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God. Whatever you conceive him to be, and whatever your labors and aspirations in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its shams, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful.
Struck by the sounds before the dawn, I knew the night had gone, and the morning breeze like a bugle blew against the drums of dawn. I stood unwound beneath the skies, and the clouds unbound by laws, and the crying rain like a trumpet sang, and asked for no applause. Lay down your weary tune, lay down the song you sung, and rest yourself beneath the strength of streams. No voice can hope to hum. And the last of leaves fell from the trees and climbed to a new love's breast, and the branches bare like a banjo played to the winds that listen the best. Lay down the song you strum and rest yourself beneath the strength of strings. No voice can hope to hum. And as I gaze down in the river's mirror, and I watched its winding strum, and the water smooth ran like a hymn, and like a harp did hum. Lay down your weary to lay down. Lay down the song you strum and rest yourself neath the strength of strings. No voice can hope to hum.
Into the presence of. We've come to the time in our service for the sharing of some remembrances of Jack. I want to note that this time in our service, with only 3 people sharing, but there are opportunities for all of you to share, although perhaps all of you won't share because it'd be a really long time. But there will be time for conversation, refreshments down in our Beeman Hall downstairs, and then there will be a time of open mic for broader sharing, for anyone who wishes to step up and speak. You might at that time share a memory or a poem or a song or simply a few heartfelt words. As I understand it, as Jack had wished, there will be a sign-up because he wanted everyone to know when it was their turn. That's what I'm told. And then also, just to remember, Jack always wanted folks to not just do their stuff and leave, to stick around and listen. So do stick around and listen downstairs. There will also be a basket down there for cards and a basket for contributions. Jack has asked that donations in his honor be given to the minister's discretionary fund of this church, which is a fund that helps people in need. So there will be a basket for those donations downstairs as well. But now let's hear some more remembrances, and I'd like to invite Buzz to come forward to speak, and then I'd invite the other 2 speakers just to come forward as each finishes.
Put my little new friend there. So. Wow. I was sitting at home this morning and I was thinking about, what I would say about today at Jack's memorial. He'd given me one of his books on poetry and it was laying there and I picked it up. I started thumbing through it and reading little tidbits of it here and there, and I come up on one particular poem that kind of caught my eye, and now I forgot the name of it. Some of you poets may help me with it. It's something about I walked away, something like that. Anyway, I guess I got it all wrong. But anyway, Jack talked about, he was on this trail and he went up and back in somewhere out of Boston there, and he said he was looking for this coyote usually around there or something like that, and the coyote wasn't there, and he he said there were some other animals that he would usually see, they weren't there, and he walked on, he was looking at the trees and the meadows and all of those kinds of things, and then he came back to the car, and he got in his car and he drove, and there was a deer across the field, and he stopped and he got out, and the deer was set about 50 feet away, and he looked at the deer, and the deer looked back at him for probably a good 2 minutes, and then he got, more people on the road, and so he got back in his car and he left, and he went on and said some other things that I can't remember, and but then the very last sentence, you know, he said it's just all about love. You know, and to me that was Jack McCarthy. You know, his love of life, you know, his love of his poetry, you know, he opened that part of his life to me, and I never knew they had poetry slams, you know. So they had one here, and I thought, well, I'm going to go watch this poetry slam. And it just opened up a whole new part of life that I never knew anything about. And wow, you know, we shared about, you know, he shared with me about, well, one of his poems was, he had wrote about Kathleen, one of his daughters, when she was about 8 years old, and he talked about, you know, about she would go to the AA meetings with him, you know, and on and on and on. I had the honor and the privilege and the pleasure of meeting the world famous Kathleen when she was out here. She come down to one of our meetings for a bit, you know, and I got to meet her. What a pleasure that was. And Jack was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person. He enriched my life, you know. He became part of my home group downstairs a number of years ago. And towards the end of his life, you know, I got to go down to where he lived, where him and Carol lived. And they had, and I'd call him on the phone and we'd chat a little bit. And one time I called and I heard Carol in the background now, Jack, you can't talk too long now, you know. I think you could get pretty weak at that point. And me and another friend of mine, Steve, went down one day to visit him, and they'd moved the bed out into the living room so he didn't have to walk so far to get around. And he was laying there, and Carol mentioned, well, he loved sports, and I didn't know that about Jack when I first met him. And of course, like you heard, Boston Red Sox, you know, the Patriots, and Carol mentioned this poem that he had wrote about the famous first baseman for the Boston Red Sox by the name of Buckner. Some of you may remember the famous error in the World Series where they lost, you know. There he was, laying on his back, very, very weak, but he recited that poem for me and Steve, you know. What a brilliant, brilliant man he was, you know. And, you know, I learned that, you know, I'm not in charge of who comes into my life, you know, how long they stay there or when they leave, you know. But I've been taught to treat them with love and kindness while they're there. And, you know, and I hope I treated Jack with love and kindness while he was part of my life. And I'll be eternally grateful for God to have put Jack McCarthy into my life. I love you, Jack McCarthy. Thank you much.
Hi, I'm Marilyn. I'm Carol's sister. And like a lot of us have learned, when we get up to a podium, we're not in charge, so we just wait and see what comes out. I was not a part of this home group, but we have a worldwide home group, and when Jack used to come to visit in California, he would go to some of my favorite meetings with me, and I have a lot of friends who are fans of Jack's, and they all loved looking on Facebook and seeing some of the things that I put in there that have been printed about Jack in the last few weeks. The Boston Globe article, and anyway, he was special to a lot of people in California, and when he was there, he'd do the Ugly Mug gig, and he did a Gypsy Den gig, and he did some things in Venice and Los Angeles, San Diego, but I used to go every time they came, almost every summer with them for the last several years to the Ugly Mug. And there's something I'm going to share because Carol asked me to share it, and I shared it at a gig in Seattle for Jack that was before he passed. And I'll just start by saying when Carol met Jack, I lived in California where we were all from, and she was living back east, and she had met him in a personal act, and she was attracted because he said he liked body surfing. And I was a little bit skeptical. He might like California blondes or something, because who body surfs in Boston? Anyway, as I got to know Jack, and over 20 years, he spent a lot of time in our California home, and especially my husband Roger and I really enjoyed the visit since we moved to Huntington Beach 7 years ago, and we were just 4 blocks from the pier and good body surfing. So Jack and Carol would come stay in the summer, and there was a meeting at Lifeguard Tower 11 at 8 o'clock in the morning every day of the week. And Jack would put on his bathing suit, grab his famous coffee mug that had his special coffee, tea, whatever he was addicted to in that cup. And it was non-alcoholic. And he'd take his shoes and sandals and his beach towel and head off to that Lifeguard Tower 11 meeting and body surfing. And one day he came home dripping wet, no towel, no shoes, and no mug. And I said, Jack, what happened? And he said somebody took his stuff out the sand while he was body surfing. And he couldn't stop talking about the mug. And the funny thing was, he gave Roger a present of an identical mug too. And Roger had not yet used the mug. And I thought Jack was just going to fall over with joy when I pulled out the mug and said, here, you can have Roger's. And the real thing that I was asked to share is I went to watch Jack body surf. I body surfed with him a few times, Carol and I, and we body surf in California where you catch the wave and you fall with the wave and then you bounce along the top of the whitewater. And our dad taught us when we were little, and he used to put one foot in the air like a flag, so us 4 kids used to follow the foot. And when I went to watch Jack body surf, the wave comes along, I see Jack's head, and all of a sudden he's gone. And the waves were pretty far out, and I thought he died or disappeared under the water. And next thing I know, right on the sand where my feet are, Jack washes up with the water. He doesn't ride the top of the wave. He becomes the wave. And he ends up on the furthermost margin of sand that you can ride to. And I've never seen another body surfer like him in my life. And he is so in love and has such a passion for body surfing that unfortunately after I think it was his hip replacement or shoulder replacement, he didn't want to walk to the beach with us because he didn't want to look at the water because he couldn't go in. He loved body surfing so much, and his style will never be replicated.
Hi, my name is Damon Narendell. I'm here more as a fan of Jack McCarthy. And Jack was a big part of what made the Seattle Poetry Slam home for me, and I know for hundreds of other poets. And it was in the spring or summer of 2003, I forget exactly when I received an email from Jack saying that he was relocating to our region. I don't recall the details of the email other than doing a lot of jumping up and down and exclaiming, "Jack is coming, Jack is coming." And it was like Santa Claus, except Jack brought poems. To all the boys and girls, not just the good ones. And Jack also made everybody cry, not just the good ones. And I didn't know him personally, but all the videos that Carol was talking about, I had seen them and loved them, and they often made me cry. The first feature that I ever did was at Bellingham's Monday night reading poetry night, and seeing myself at that time as more of an organizer than a poet, I was really humbled by this place of honor and did a lot more disclaiming than actually reading. It was a pure rookie mistake. So maybe Jack picked up on something in my set or my demeanor that said he needs a real pat on the back, I don't know. But when he approached me and I was expecting the, thanks for coming out, that was a good job kind of standard, he quoted back one of my lines to me and said, "I wish I'd written that." And to this day, it is one of the best compliments I've ever received, and not just in poetry, in my life. And I'd love to also say that it was just for me, but I know for a fact that Jack has had those moments with hundreds and hundreds of other poets, not just in our community, but across the country, where he took time out to speak very personally to another poet, to take notice of something that we hadn't noticed in ourselves, to call attention to that and do so in a way that said, "You are a rare stone worthy of polishing." So Jack's comments always came from this place of grace and love, and I would see him dole them out at every single reading. It was like he was feeding the hungry. And I don't know for sure that Jack had that same effect everywhere he went, but I can't imagine him not. So I used to take pride in being, one of the main organizers of Jack's home venue once he relocated out here. But I think honestly that Jack made a home out of every venue he read in. That every time he took the stage, he made it home, and he made it home for all of us. And even when he was smiling that mischievous smile after blowing apart the old man assumptions that some of the youngins had made about him before he got on the stage, it was never a malicious smile. It was, I don't know, it was like he was leaving breadcrumbs. He was leading us home and schooling us on breaking apart the assumptions that we made about ourselves. And in his poem Substances, Jack talks about the mind games that we all play with our own addictions. When you manage to get a handle on one, another one pops up somewhere else. And as he puts it, until you stumble on the substance of your destiny and realize that all the pain you ever gave this slip was pain of not doing this. He was doing what he loved right up until the end. He literally went out and doing exactly what he loved in the way that he wanted to be doing it. And what more could any of us ever aspire to? So Jack is and forever will be a poem, a testament to the power of the word, and an inspiration to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reminds us, dear child, what has been once so interwoven cannot be raveled, nor the gift ungiven. What we have received from Jack will live with us always. I invite you just into a few moments of remembering him. No recounting of a life, no words that anyone could say up here could ever be complete. There are special memories held by each person who knew Jack, the special times shared between just 2 or 3, long friendships that hold too many stories to tell ever. In these few moments together, let us call to our minds and our hearts those stories and times that were shared with Jack. Remember the sound of his voice and how his face lit up when he laughed. Call to mind the hard moments too, those times of loss, of anger, of pain, times of conflict, for those who are a part of the wholeness of Jack's life. Remember his pleasure when a poem was said just right, and his full attention offered when someone spoke their truth, no matter how much they fumbled the words. Think of his eyes when he looked at you in love and care, and call to mind the sureness of the touch of his hand and his steady, steadfast presence, that presence that he offered to so many people. As we pause for this musical interlude, I invite you simply to call those memories to mind. Remember Jack, a loved man. Musical interlude? Yes, please. Time together of quiet reflection and prayer, opening your hearts to each other and to God as you understand God. Spirit of love and of life, God of many names and of none, we have gathered here in joy, in celebration, in loss and in grief. One we have loved is gone from our lives, and our hearts are torn. Yet in this time may we know that in our world, what is most precious and dear is also the most fragile. The breath of life is a transitory gift. We cannot predict when it shall be taken from us. More than we mean, we take for granted this gift, and indeed the gifts of those around us who enrich our lives. In this moment of loss, we are aware of those people, the gift of their presence, and how fragile, how precious they are, how quickly they can slip from us. Today, as we remember Jack with love and sadness, may we find new resolve to speak to each other of our affection and respect. May we find resolve to live lives that are gentle and kind, which seek to brighten the lives of those around us. May this time of grief be for us a time to turn back to our lives with new insight. God of many names and of none, Spirit that lives with us always, be with us this day and in the days to come. Amen. He goes free of the earth. The sun of his last day sets clean in the sweetness of his liberty. The earth recovers from his dying, the hallow of his life remaining in all his death leaves. Radiances know him. Grown lighter than breath, he is set free in our remembering. Grown brighter than vision, he goes dark into the life of the hill that holds his peace. He is hidden among all that is and cannot be lost. Let us leave this place today. Let us go with praise. Praise for the gift of life that is ours. Praise for Jack, who blessed us so well with his life. Praise for those who surround us and uphold us in all the days to come. So may it be. Amen.
Go in peace.
To the reading, to maybe set a tone, I sometimes bring I always bring sad poems to my reading. I wanted to bring something, I mean, yeah, sure, Stephen Dobbins, yeah, he knew him, whatever. I wanted to bring something by someone local, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what poem to read, and then Mike read this poem. It's not a Mike poem, but he read this poem by a Vancouverite named R.C. Wislowski. R.C., are you still here?
No, they just wrote back.
Yeah, that'll teach him. Losing his moment of thunder. I'm going to steal it from him. Mike read this poem, and I heard this poem, and I thought, man, that poem is so fantastic. And I called R.C., and I said, R.C., I'd like to read your poem, but I want to change a couple lines to make it more, not appropriate, but to make it more personal. And he said, for Jack, whatever. So this poem is an R.C. Wislowski poem, and it's called My Soft Response to the Wars. I'm not going to go so far as to change the title. I almost did. There's a lot of funny words in this. Be careful, all right? Follow along. Okay. I will embrace the sausage makers. I will massage a pommel horse. I will prove to elevators that they're lonely, convince them to quit giving birth. I will go to the zoo with a grenade in my mouth, encourage one lone zebra to commit suicide in honor of the Serengeti. I will lead parades of beauty through the sewers of despair. I will serenade the oceans until I drive the seahorses mad with songs so lustful 100 million lunatic horses of the sea will burst forth from the depths of madness, carry us on their backs to a place where we can all weep for the sun. I will wear a prosthetic egg on my forehead. I will feed my elbow to the blind. I will search for the number 3 in an irregular place. I will escort clocks to the foot of the cross. I will send invisible wheelchairs off to do battle. I will unionize liver. I will gunder thrust pabadoo. That's what it says. It's Canadian. I will zaza trope the thundelbruskets. I will relinquish Utney. I will shake the suffer tree until all the struggle monkeys fall to the ground, impaling themselves on their own divinity. I will devour the rust that coats the eyes of man, chew the cud of history, regurgitate our pasts and all of our past lives until I vomit stars upon a carpet of infinite sorrow, where an armless nun cradles the abortions of joy. There all my skins will be forgiven, recalling every instant when I lacked and turned away. I will love you, the past dying, with a mad compassion in this, my soft response to the wars, because we are all dying all the time. Every back-waxing barber, every bingo hall dabber, every stand-up poet, to be reborn again and again, one footfall closer along a tightrope that ever stretches across a nameless chasm where 2 callous feet to feel our lives bleeds away into nothingness. And when you slip, I will catch you with these words, whether heard or read or never known at all, because it's too hard of a journey to go it alone, and loneliness can make demons of us all. So search them out, the savage flower pots of darkness, the dizzied lents that collect themselves inside the bellies of this earth. The insatiable tears of dogs know their pain, for it seems everything in their power will be done throughout our lifetimes to keep us from loving one another. Rescue love, be gentle with yourselves, revenge kindness with what you know is true. R.C. Wislowski. Oh, poets, I love it when I look at a list and I see you've spelled your names wrong, your own name. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Mike H. to the stage.
Thank you. My name's Mike. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Mike.
I'm also a poet, and Interesting, only Jack McCarthy could get an AA meeting moved upstairs out of the basement. That was pretty nice today, right? It was amazing. Leave it to Jack. I don't feel grief. I've only known Jack since last summer, but the time I've known him, he hasn't grieved at all. So like I can't feel sad because he didn't feel sad. I know he misses his family and Carol and like all of you, but like it was the next great adventure for him. So the day that he died, that night, I was at my home group in White Center, and I read Drunks, and I could feel I was channeling him, man. I could feel him in me. And I had a whole room full of people weeping by the end. It was an amazing moment. I met Jack at Richard Hugo House last summer in a tribute to him. They called it a roast, but it was really a testimonial. And then we became friends, and one thing led to another anyway. The last reading that Jack did in public was at my school, South Seattle Community College, which I was incredibly honored. I also did a reading with Jack. It was at of all places, a wine bar in Kirkland. And he contacted the guy who put it on. He says, see if you can get hold of Mike Hickey on Facebook. I'd like him to read with me. And wow, yeah, so I said yes. And I read this poem. It's called Soda Fountain, an ode to old John. Slapdash, backlash, succotash waltz. Daddy drinks the chocolate shake, Mama likes the malt. Little Petey's root beer floats, Jan's banana splits. Nostalgia is a sharkskin suit, amazing it still fits. A man is singing to himself, the jukebox, his best friend. He has a cane, is kind of old, and he can see the end. But it is clear he has no fear, of this much he is sure. Death is not the end of life, just the next great adventure. And when the family drives on home content in their new car, they talk about the singing man admired from afar. They seem to know he loves this world, he's lived a lot of years, and he'll live 1,000,000 more, my friend, 1,000,000 miles from here.
That is Mike H. Give him a hand, please. Please, and keep it going. Please welcome Chris J. to the stage.
Number 973.
No poem starter for you. I'm going to take a couple minutes, a couple stories for Jack, and then I'm going to read my poem. I've known Jack since he's been in Washington State, and over the last 10 plus years our friendship grew. Our connection began because of our shared passion for both spoken word and poetry, the open mic, the healing power poetry has, and its ability to make all of us better listeners. I had the honor of organizing several readings for him, and yes, the two at the wine bar, and several times we were even read together. He read a poem during my marriage ceremony in 2010. During the last few months, I was blessed to spend quite a bit of time with him. We watched a few DVDs together. We went out to a bookstore in the movies in November. We saw Argo, which we liked very much. I got to know Carol a lot better recently and realized, particularly for the last year, that she unselfishly shared her husband with us, making it possible for him to do several readings that would never have happened if she wasn't so supportive of Jack's poetry and work. And as she so often said about her, she was his angel. Carol McCarthy, thank you very, very much. Yeah. A couple things. In January, I was at Jack and Carol's. Carol left for some errands she needed to make. I told Jack I wrote a poem about Al-Anon a few weeks earlier. He wanted to hear it, so I shared that with him. Then we watched a movie on DVD, or started to. And then when Carol came back and she was getting ready to read, Carol asked if Jack had shared his new haiku with me. He said it last night. It made us laugh. Tell him, Jack. So Jack recited it for me. Here is that particular haiku. Haiku for hospice workers. Nurses in hospice must have a very hard time getting references. Okay, here's my poem. Poem for a friend. We poets who play and toil over words expect so much from them, attempt to find and create ways to express our feelings, paint the world as we see it. We imagine we own them in our personal, unique, and individual ways, aware that anyone and everyone can use them however they want to. But still, the way we put them together makes them ours. Some compete with real and imagined opponents to be more honest, more clever, more poignant, more profound, or sometimes more succinct with the same supplies everyone else has access to. And at some point we all realize these tools we share, called words, have been abused, neglected, hijacked into different uses so that their meanings are blurred or twisted into something that has less clarity. Some combination of words have been used so often they're taken for granted, ignored, or ridiculed, and sometimes the writer's worst nightmares seem to be true. Words aren't enough. They don't always comfort the afflicted. They don't heal all the wounds. They don't win all the battles. They don't create unintended, or I should say, they create unintended consequences. They don't even honor our heroes or hurt our enemies the way we intended. Worst of all, they sometimes escape and hurt the ones we love most. Some cannot read or understand the words we use. Some add or subtract definitions or ignore ones they don't wish to process. Others emphasize them in different ways and lose what they represent in whole or in part during the process of attempted assimilation. If we become masters of style and develop a smooth finesse in the ways of words, we develop a false confidence in our ability to control how others relate to the way we combine, juxtapose, or jumble them. And when we are criticized, rejected, bullied by the same words we have used for our own self-professed noble with the very same instruments others have attacked us with, yet it is not 100% accurate to call this the great equalizer. And now, when I struggle to use some words to remember a friend and poet who has recently died, I know how utterly inadequate I am in picking, choosing, combining just the right ones, the perfect ones, to express what I feel I need to say. In some ways, this inadequacy is a blessing, for my internal stubbornness will insist I continue searching, practicing, composing until I get a little closer to what I wanted to say. Instead of one perfect grouping of words to perfectly memorialize my friend for all time, I'll need to write more, return to the struggle, try again and again and again. Today, I'll simply write his name. He created the words better than most ever could. And by spelling out his name, perhaps you'll seek out the prose, the poems, the essays he composed. You'll remember him the way he cherished most by reading and hearing his words. His name, Jack McCarthy. Thank you.
That is Chris, ladies and gentlemen. Give him a hand. And please welcome Jonathan R. to the stage.
So I knew Jack back in Boston. We got to know each other about 20 years ago. And there was one summer when I came back from my freshman year of college, and Jack and I were taking a walk. And I talked to him about my first real love relationship. And I told him that I was unhappy in the relationship, and I felt that it was time for it to end. But I also felt guilty and scared about ending it. And Jack wrote a poem inspired by this conversation that we had. So I'd like to read it to you. And I want to do this really because I love the poem, but also because I want to do this thing that I hope people will do for a really long time to come, which is read Jack's poetry to other people, because he cared so much about the life a poem has when someone reads it out loud to other people. So it's called Don't Wait. End it now. Do it face to face. There is no easy way. Unlike virginity, integrity begins today. To stay is self-immolation. To wait, the death of 1,000 cuts. The honey trap, you stumbled right in. How could you not? the sheen of her knees, the smell of her hair brushing past you in a narrow place, dancing the naturalness of her grace. I'd have done the same thing. That doesn't mean you're not responsible. You meant it when you said you loved her. Between your saying and her hearing, the word forever bonded on. It is ambient. Every corruption ends in pain. Around sex, pain times 7. When she said no strings, you both pretended it was true. Maybe she even meant it. If so, she couldn't make it stick. Nobody can. If you didn't know that before, you know it now. You owe her. You will always owe her. The gentle way she reassured your fumbling. All your failings she embraced, forgave. End it so her healing can begin. Quick is as close to kind as this will get. But don't expect you'll be friends afterwards. Exchange of Christmas cards, perhaps. Yours first, allow a week for hers. You didn't love her enough, and that is never to be forgiven. When you've survived a few of these, you will reflect that every person who has known you best in this life hates you now. You'll wonder what this says about the kind of man you are become. With luck in time, from all this wondering, someone more sure-footed will emerge. Thank you.
Bravo.
Jonathan, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Neil S. to the stage.
Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Scott. I'm a recovering talk show host.
Hi, Neil.
I belong to a 12-step group called On and On and On and On and On and On. I will try to work my program today. As some of you may know, Jack was an avid runner. And he used to love to get T-shirts. He would run in every race he could find back in Boston. He had this massive collection, I see Carol at the back laughing, of these T-shirts. This is a poem that I wrote about Jack, and it's called The Race. Jack is not dead. He is very much alive in the hearts of those who knew him, those who loved him. He simply ran out of breath. He ran out of breath as he rounded the turn and headed for home at the finish line in full view. He gave it all he had, and he had so much to give. And that giving will continue beyond the limitations of time. His race, his marathon, it's over. Yet the crowds will grow larger as his words fill new hearts, and his voice continues to be heard ever so gently. He left this life with grace and gratitude and an abundance of serenity and love after a life well lived, after limitless love. Jack McCarthy was larger than life. And now that the race is over, Jack McCarthy is larger than death. His legacy is one of hope, of warmth and light, of love and compassion. Jack dined at the table of plenty, and he shared his meal with us. His light will continue to burn brightly in the hearts of those who have been deeply touched by his words, by his love, and by his life.
Bravo.
I had the good fortune to be last Saturday in Lexington, Massachusetts at Jack's memorial. And I get up that morning and I wrote a real short piece called The Poet. I've written poetry all my life. On napkins, envelopes, legal pads, illegal pads. But I write mostly for me. I write poetry all the time. Yet I am not a poet, but simply a man who writes poetry, and puts his feelings into words. Jack McCarthy was a fucking poet. And the last piece I want to read and close with was the very last poem that Jack wrote. I want to share this with you because it's about the love of his life, Carol. It's also about the love in the poetry community. And finally, it's about this place that he loved so deeply, Marysville. It's called Who? The last 10 minutes to Marysville, my iPod was doing one of its 60-year shuffle miracles, and Carol was philosophizing, recalling how threatening rock and roll and rhythm and blues had seemed in the 50s and 60s to mainstream white parents, and likening that to the kind of poetry that my friends and I do, and the way the poetry establishment likes to keep us marginalized at a safe distance. As usual, I thought she was overstating the case a little. But on balance, she was making a lot of sense. And I listened comfortably, and I let her ramble uninterrupted. About the time we turned off I-5 into Marysville, she suddenly got real quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Who is going to listen to me?"